Hi everyone, I'm Miss Lydia from the Boston Library. Thank you for joining me for our craft project. Today we are making coasters. So I have two simple techniques to show you. Our supplies for this project include tiles. You can use any shape and size that you want. These happen to be 4x4 white tiles. They have a glossy finish on the top that's important for this first technique. You can pick these up at any hardware store, just individual tiles. They're really pretty cheap, usually between 50 cents and $1. You're also going to need some Sharpies in an assortment of colors. So whatever your favorite colors are, you can usually do 2 or 3 colors per coaster. You do want to make sure that you are using Sharpies and not anything that's washable. That's another important aspect of this project. The other two things that we need are some rubbing alcohol. So I'm going to be using the 91% rubbing alcohol. You need something that is around 90%. The 70% will not cause the ink to bleed the way that the 90% will. So you need some 90% rubbing alcohol and a clear acrylic spray paint to protect the top coat. And then for the bottoms, you can either use cork or you can use felt. Again, in any color that you want. I happen to have some white, so it'll match the sides. I'm going to use that on the bottoms of the tiles so that they don't scratch any surfaces that I'm using them on. My first step is to clean off my tiles. So if there's any dust, a lot of times if you're picking them up from hardware stores, they may have some dust on them. You can use the same rubbing alcohol that you're going to use later in the process and just clean them off so that there's no dust on that surface. Using the rubbing alcohol to clean them off also makes it so that there's no oils on the top, which might make your marker not adhere as well. So because you're using Sharpies, you want to make sure that your work surface is covered, that you're not going to get any of that permanent marker on anything. Make sure you also are careful not to get it on your hands. And then you're just going to take your markers and you're going to scribble all over. You want to get a good amount of the ink onto it. You can be very freeform on your designs. It will change completely once you add the rubbing alcohol to it. So you don't want to get too precise. You just want to have some different colors on there to give it some interest. One piece of advice I would give on choosing your colors is to think about how they will blend together. So you want to use colors that will flow well, because as soon as we add that rubbing alcohol, they're going to mix and flow. Once I'm done coloring in with the Sharpie, before I add the rubbing alcohol, I have a design that looks like this. You don't need to be precise with this. You don't need to get every bit of white covered, and you certainly don't want to have a design that is too specific, because as soon as you add that rubbing alcohol, it is going to blend. So now I have my 91% rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle, and I'm just going to lightly mist it. Now you can use a dropper. You could use a brush or a sponge as well. You just risk pulling some of that ink off. A spray bottle with a light misting spray works really well. And then you can just let these evaporate. You can see the design is already starting to move and flow. You don't want to touch them while this is happening, because if you do, it will all slide to one side and you won't have a design anymore. So just again, let them sit, give them about a half an hour. At that point, they should be totally dry. Now that my rubbing alcohol has evaporated, you can see my designs have changed significantly. The ink on the top of these tiles is still rather fragile, so you want to be careful that you don't touch the top when you're handling them. To help give this a little bit stronger surface, I'm going to actually place them in the oven. So I'm going to take this piece of tin foil, put it on a baking sheet, and place them in the oven at 250 degrees Fahrenheit. I can leave them in there for about an hour, maybe a little bit longer. What this does is it pulls any remaining moisture from the rubbing alcohol out of the tile. And that's going to allow for our spray adhesive to get a better, more solid coat. To give you a bit of an idea of the difference, you can see that this one has quite a bit more gloss to the top. This one has been in the oven, this one has not. Once my tiles are out of the oven, I'm going to allow them to cool completely, and then I'm going to spray a light coat of a clear spray on top of that. You can go with a matte or a gloss, depending on what type of a look you want. Remember, if you're using spray paint, you have to cover your surfaces. It's best to do it outside when there's no wind, but you still have good ventilation. My acrylic spray is completely dry now, and I'm going to add the backing. So I have felt here that has a sticky backing paper to it. So I'm going to lay it face down, so the soft side is down right now, and I'm going to trace out my tiles. Then I'm simply going to cut out my felt just inside those lines so it doesn't overlap the tile. When I have my felt squares cut out, I'm just going to flip my tiles over carefully, peel that backing paper off, and stick it down. Depending on how strong the adhesive is, you may need to add some hot glue. You'll have to glue them down if you're using cork as well. You may want to double check your squares before you stick them down, although if you do end up with an overhang, you can always just trim that separately. When you have your felt backing on or your cork, your coaster is completely done. As another option, if you want, you can take some paint and go around the edges very carefully if you want a more finished look on your edge. Our second coaster design option is very customizable. So this just uses any sort of decorative paper, a design, a photograph, a map, music, anything that you want to use, and you're just going to simply trace your design onto your tile. So I have some vintage looking flowers that I've printed off. I'm going to try to center my design, trace out my tile, and then I'm going to cut out my designs. Again, going just inside those lines that I traced. Then you're going to want to check your design, make sure that it doesn't overhang any of the sides. If it does, you want to trim it down just a little bit more. With my image cut to size, I'm going to take some Mod Podge, and I'm going to brush a thin layer down right on my tile. I want to make sure that I get it all the way out to the edges so that my design will stick down. Then I'm going to center my design and carefully press that down. You want to make sure that you press out from the center so that you don't get any bubbles, and go all the way out to those edges. And then to keep the design from wrinkling, I would give it a few minutes to dry so that that bottom layer dries. Then we're going to go straight over top of that with at least one, but probably several coats of Mod Podge. And remember, a little bit of bubbling will naturally happen with the Mod Podge. It usually goes away. If it gets extreme, then you're getting too much Mod Podge on there at a time. So I'm going to just, again, do light coats, let it dry, do another coat, until I feel like I have a pretty solid base built up there. We want to make sure that our image is fully waterproof. As you're adding additional coats, make sure you go right around those edges. You want to make sure that that is sealed up. That's going to be your most common place for getting water in there and lifting the image off of your tile. Then I'm going to allow my Mod Podge to completely dry, follow the same procedure to add the felt or cork to the back, and these are all set. If you want a little bit of extra protection on them, you can add a little bit of that same acrylic clear spray to the top after the Mod Podge is completely dry.
The clear acrylic coat is now completely dry, and the felt is attached to the bottom of all our coasters, and they are now finished. If you have any questions on the process, please comment below and I'll help you out. I hope you enjoyed this week's project, and we will see you next week.